Before we ask a bunch of questions, Cole, you said in the beginning, you said, I'm a failure. I first want to say, like, you're brave and courageous. And I'm sorry that you had to do that, because as business owners, we know that we wear our business, like our business is our lives. And so the fact that you have the audacity, the courage, the bravery, the task maturity, the wisdom to know when to cut it and do that, you're not a failure. And I just, before we get into that, we're with you. You know, it is, and for you to come on here and talk about it and tell that story, a lot of people would not be able to do that. So I just first want to tell you that before we expose you. Sorry.
Yeah, well worded, Steven. Way better than I would have said.
Bruce, you non-empathetic asshole. We're working on Bruce's feelings. We're working on Bruce's feelings. It's okay. We're working on it. Okay. Cole, can we now let's go back to it a little bit.
So because you've had like a, you know, I think we've known each other for some time through the shows and just visiting out in California and such. I mean, you had definitely what appeared from the outside as a pretty, you know, a good sized business. I mean, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that was a lot of my downfall. So, I mean, we never like raised money or had like any sort of investor. We were a bootstrapped print shop, and so we would get these opportunities. Our first year, we did barely anything. It was like 100,000. But our second year, we were at 400 something thousand plus on basically one customer, and then everyone else was like 10-15% of the business. And they helped us get into the auto situation when we were in the 400,000s range. And then we kept growing from there. And, you know, everybody loves seeing like pallets of shirts on Instagram. And so kind of because we looked busy, we got more busy. And so that's how we started landing some of these bigger clients. Going back like, you know, 2017, 2018, those types of years, we were not quite yet having to deal with people like Printful. Printful had started, but Printful was somebody that like a few people knew existed. It was not what it is today. And we actually were offering, you know, fulfillment and inventory management, which was fairly unique going back then. And basically we had no investment in it and other companies did. So we started to see this thing where we got pushed more and more into volume screen printing, because we didn't play the print on demand game right. We basically didn't seize the moment at all. And so going into COVID, we had all the COVID problems. Then COVID had these weird boosts where the whole market flipped. But then we started to see like 2023, we started to see things where like one client who was doing 300K by themselves, that client dropped their sales down to 70K because we were doing things with marketing companies, and those marketing companies were getting their budget slashed. So they would go from nice items with high ticket prices to bottom of the barrel t-shirts or tote bags. And we would see them not leave us, but just spend less. So yeah, it was a combination of print on demand rising, DTF rising, and us being built for volume that was becoming more and more of a commodity and less valuable. Back in the day, like 2019-ish, you could brag about screen printing being this superior thing. We were the kind of people that could set up a very difficult job. We would print for people like Post Malone, and it would be like a full color screen print, and it would look great. But more and more, we started seeing people think digital really was good enough, and we saw the prices of digital come down too. So unless it was a very high volume run, you had problems with screen printing being anything more than a cheap commodity. And that's kind of where we ended up. I think a lot of my mistakes had to do with not hiring the right team to support me. I ended up doing this I ran everything and I kept kind of filling labor positions. And I didn't really have those, I didn't have the marketing partner and the sales partner. I basically had me and Joni, and then everyone else was labor. And that was another mistake.
Is Cole's wife.
Yeah.
But the business, I'm assuming, was profitable at some point, right? Like before.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
there were years where we were killing it.
Was there a sweet spot then before, maybe let's say the 2023 where you said marketing budget started to get cut, you had this overhead, so top line started to shrink, but overhead was still kind of high. When was the sweet spot? What was that like?
I don't know, like $1.3 million or something a year. But also we had like a manageable amount of staff, because at our peak of staff, we were at like 16 staff, and I found myself not being able to get the most out of them anymore. Like I couldn't keep my eyes on the individual people, and you would find out that at the end of the day, their output was like really unimpressive. So I either needed to hire supervisors at that point, or I needed to downsize a bit. And so when we were somewhere around like, I don't know, 10, 11 people, it was more manageable. I was still handling it myself. And then we were like blatantly profitable in the business because we could bring in enough orders. It was only like $80,000 to $100,000 a month we needed to bring in. But we didn't have quite as much overhead at that moment. So it's just kind of been this thing where like figuring out how to grow and not overgrowing, I think, is the biggest battle in this game. Because we've had days where people hand us checks for $50K or $80K, and you're like, oh, we can never get this done in time. I need to hire. I wish I had another auto, whatever. And then you have another month right after it where you make $65K and you're like, this is a disaster. How in the world are we going to survive? I have to lay people off. And that kind of roller coaster ride of buying things because you are losing an opportunity that you don't have the size for, balanced with, what can I actually sustain? That was a lot of the struggle.
Cole, it's really interesting. I've been talking to some shops lately that said like we all went into business to do one thing, and then our customers pushed us to become something else. And that something else we are not equipped to do. Do you feel like it was you kind of getting swayed by the industry? Because it's like you went into the business to screen print and probably not to do a lot of like POD or inventory. And then all of a sudden you get a couple clients, you change your business around a little bit. And then that sometimes is what also like sent you on a decline. Do you feel like if you did something different or stayed true to something else, like the business would have been okay? Like, what are your biggest regrets if you were to go backwards? Obviously you said labor or supervision. What else, like as far as your niche goes?
I mean, if you go way backwards, the real reason I started it, when I started it like by myself, was I wanted it to be like a fairly customer focused, arty kind of a print shop. I wanted it to be like, we're capable of doing very difficult screen prints. We're going to be doing the discharge, the water base. We're going to be doing the high quality, expensive blanks. And I wanted it to be kind of a bougie print shop. And
like a craft brewery.
Yeah, exactly. And like in the very beginning, like you would come into our office on Pico. This was our very first office. It was only like 1,200 square feet. And you would like hang out on the couch, and we like had coffee and waters, and we were like having these nice little meetings about like what your vision for your brand was. And then we were able to charge quite a bit. But as we would land clients and we started seeing these bigger numbers, we started getting more sucked into the production and got pulled away from the customer side. And then we've had opportunities to print for, insane people. Like we've printed for Ariana Grande, and we've printed for car companies, and we've printed for Xbox and stuff like that. But what we ended up discovering was a lot of those people that you land end up being through marketing companies, and the marketing companies, they ultimately end up being about cost. And to be honest, they're making way more money than any of the print shops, because they're taking your print pricing, marketing up, and they have zero labor, zero overhead, which is why you have these huge marketing companies making a fortune, and they have, billion-dollar valuations on the highest end. It's because they have all the corporate clientele, and they have basically none of the overhead. The overhead is on us.
Right. And they're just a service. They're just trading money for time, basically, and their expertise. Right.
Yep.
And I think what's also interesting is there's a lot of, in the entertainment business, there's probably so much turnover with agents and marketing teams and people. And it's like, does loyalty even exist? I don't know.
No, we were doing a lot of influencer stuff. So like we did H3, and then we also did like the Team 10, which was one of the Logan Paul projects. And what we would find is like we would get their stuff done on time. They would be charging $80 for a Gildan hoodie. Like they were making an amazing margin. And then we would be told someone in Ohio wants to do the same print job for 80 cents. And then even if we matched it, we'd find out somebody in Indiana wants to do the same print job for 68 cents. And it's just like,
it's a race to the bottom.
Sure, we're doing 10,000 units, but when they start calling any shop, they all say that they're ready to do 10,000 units.
Right. And Cole, do you think would you attribute this decline to the rise of labor? Like it's just harder to stay in business because labor costs are skyrocketing, or do you think it's consistency of sales and business?
I mean, my labor costs rose dramatically because we went from, I don't know if we were at 9 or 10 when we first opened because I was my own labor, but we ended up at 15 minimum. And then towards the end, they announced the California fast food $20 an hour thing. So now you have your person who's at the end of the dryer, who is essentially your lowest skilled worker,
that could
telling you
burgers.
that they can go to Taco Bell and make more money. And it makes for a situation where, like, to be honest, a lot of this industry is running on questionable labor practices. And there's a lot of under the table nonsense that happens in California. And so we didn't want to be a part of that. And we also felt like we wanted to reward our team properly. So like I would have printers making good pay and stuff. And it meant that I could be beaten pretty easily on price. I mean, if they left the state, people could slaughter me on price, like those $4 ads you see all the time. And then even if they were in our local area, I wasn't really the same type of labor force that I really needed to be to compete on like a contract level. So I would make good money on like the 200 piece local small business order, but I couldn't necessarily handle the big contract order and be profitable.
For shops listening to this, labor percentages are skyrocketing or they're starting to become really high. So if you do $1 million in business, theoretically your labor should be like 25%, call it $250,000. If you find that your labor is like 35, 39, 40%, right? You are eating away 12 to 15% of your profit that should be going to you. And you can quickly run yourself you can bleed out basically because the ratio, like a 10 or 15% jump in your labor rate, that means you have to do, I don't know, $300,000 more just to make up for that money that you're spending.